Welcome to another ClearPoint Unlock podcast. My name's Dave Shepherd. I'm General Manager Software Engineering at ClearPoint. We do everything from software engineering of all different shapes and sizes, and IT consultancy, program delivery, design, and we have a number of partners. And I'm joined today by Jake McInteer from MongoDB. Hey Jake, how are you?
Good, thank you mate. Thanks for having me.
Good. You want to just intro your background and your role at Mongo?
Well, my title's a Senior Enterprise Account Executive at Mongo, but I've worn a few different hats over the years that I've been here. So I've been at MongoDB for around 6 years now.
Right.
Originally actually started up in the UK while I was over there for my OE. And then moved back a few years ago to essentially establish our business here in New Zealand. And these days I lead our relationships with the, largest and most strategic customers we have here in New Zealand.
Okay. And Mongo's been around for many years. It's probably changed a lot over the years from when people started playing around with it in the early sort of web days and mobile days. Do you want to talk us through a little bit where Mongo's gone over the last little while and where it's at now and the things that have changed recently?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because Mongo has been around a while now. We were founded, it was around 2007, 2008.
Yeah, a long time ago, eh?
And so that's coming up on a 20th birthday type thing. I think we'll be allowed to go to the pub this year when we turn 18. But really, most people probably first heard of Mongo around 2013, 14. Big data was all the rage. And that's the snapshot that people have of us.
Yeah.
And in those days, we were a 5-year-old company. We were about 100, 150 people, largely based out in New York, and still a fledgling database company.
Yeah.
Since then, we've grown to more than 5,000 people in the team around the world. We have a cloud platform that's the most widely available database in the world in more than 100 cloud regions. And we've really broadened out the product set. So one of the things I think makes the point is back in 2021, we spent more on R&D engineering than we did in the first 10 years of our existence. And so what people thought of as a relatively niche NoSQL type database has really evolved into much more of a developer data platform that offers much broader capability than people realise.
Yeah, and from an AI angle, because the topic today is, I forgot to mention that at the start, the topic today is AI-enabled app modernisation, and I think we've both got a good story to talk about. There's some really good synergies between the sort of things that ClearPoint's doing and has done, and I can talk about that a bit later on, but also I'm keen to hear the AI angle around Mongo, because from what I understand, you guys have built in some vector database capability. I'm keen to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, there's a few angles for me on the AI stuff. There's building new AI applications and then what are the technology decisions you're making within that and why. But there's also, I think, this underlying current around modernisation where traditionally modernisation has always been hard and quite expensive, and the business case for it is really tricky, and a lot of the time it just doesn't stack up. And what we're seeing more and more these days with customers is bringing generative AI into that modernisation process lowers the cost and accelerates the outcomes massively. And all of a sudden, the economics for those kind of modernisation activities stack up. The business cases are getting approved.
100% agree.
And then, even I read a paper from Google, and they've been doing a lot of it. But it's really the foundations of what's technical debt, and using Gen AI to solve some of those. It's library version upgrades and relatively simple things that no engineer actually wants to do, but need to be done. Yeah. Once they're done, without that technical debt holding those organisations back, they can then really innovate a lot faster on top.
Yeah, we're finding the same. App modernisation, it's a broad topic, and what we're finding a lot of is, as you say, customers have a legacy application. Sometimes it's legacy because of its age and where the technology's landed. It might be in a bit of a technology cul-de-sac. Sometimes it's written in a still modern language, but the knowledge has disappeared from the company. So they're left with this code base that's maybe not well documented from a specification or an architecture point of view, and they might not have the knowledge and the skills so much in-house. And so they tend to leave it alone. And the longer you leave it alone, the more it decays and it becomes more legacy. And then it becomes this big, risky, expensive thing you've got to try and replace. Yeah. And so what we find is, how can you de-risk that and lower the cost of doing that? And AI has given us a whole load of tools, which I'm sure you've got a story around as well, and I've certainly got some.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting the way it's played out with legacy modernisation over the last decade or so. People know that there's problems in their IT environment, and legacy poses a risk. Yeah. But it never stacks up enough to do anything about until it's a huge, expensive problem, and then they have to deal with it.
There's a security vulnerability found, and they've got no way of quickly patching. That's the other thing that's happened.
Exactly. And one of our customers actually is Bendigo and Adelaide Bank over in Australia, and they refer to a lot of these legacy applications as Hiluxes, although I think like Land Rovers or something like that might be more apt. But they're applications that work. They're the workhorses of the bank, fulfilling really critical functions, but they're also 20 and 30 years old, and they're just doing their job. And the reason I think Land Rovers might be better is they're a little bit older, and the mechanics that work on them are starting to retire, and you're therefore losing all of this knowledge out of organisation, and that risk just cranks up and
Absolutely.
up, right?
Yeah. And so, I'm keen to hear about how Mongo approached that. What sort of tooling or what sort of tools or out-of-the-box functionality can Mongo bring to that problem? Because we can approach it from a ClearPoint point of view. We're also language agnostic. We're cloud agnostic. We can look at it from let's ingest the code base into an AI model and help us write documentation, help us write specifications for it, and then query it through a chat style. What is this class doing? As if you were talking to the original architects or the original engineers who worked on it. Maybe not quite the same, but you can still get that information back out of the code with the sort of tools. Is that the sort of thing that Mongo does, or are there additional angles that Mongo can bring to that?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix. So it is still that traditional kind of software development lifecycle. The high-level steps that go into application modernization, even when using generative AI, haven't changed massively. You're going to get the code base. You're going to do analysis. You're going to identify problems and design a target state. You're probably going to write some tests, and then you're going to implement changes and confirm that those tests pass, and you're going to roll it out. The software development lifecycle hasn't necessarily changed, but the steps within it get much faster. So for Bendigo, the application that we worked on with them, this is going back actually around 18 months now. So with the way the generative AI space has evolved since then, there's probably could be done faster and even better today than it was back then. But the problem they had, they'd moved a lot of their applications already to cloud and gone through a certain degree of modernization, but they were really stuck with the last kind of 10, 20% of applications where the business case just wasn't really there for it. And for us, we are like an approved standard for their modern databases and microservices and stuff they build, but their legacy environment was on typical relational databases that you might expect. We came to them with the idea about 18 months ago of could we use generative AI to actually massively reduce the cost of doing this? And then through that experimentation project, they were a great partner to work with on it. Because they'd already done planning and business cases for this stuff, they had really good metrics on how long this was going to take and how much it was going to cost them. And using generative AI actually accelerated the process by 90%. And it meant that they could do the modernization for that first application at 1/10 of the cost of what they were expecting to do it for. And then now doing that for other applications as well.
Okay, so you guys did a proof of concept with them to prove out the use case or to prove out a particular workload. And then based on that, have they adopted the same model that you proved out and they're just working through the rest of their legacy stack?
Yeah, exactly that. So we called it a pilot at the time. And the idea was as well, the pilot, it was as much about modernizing that one application as it was actually about building a factory that they could take the other legacy applications through as well. So that started with the agent teller app, essentially, which is Bendigo has lots of rural branches that are embedded in like the local post shop and that kind of stuff, where the local postie or the local dairy owner is the teller. And so those are agents. And so for a rural bank like Bendigo, that's a really important part of their customer base. So very critical system, and that's the one that we started with. Now we've built out these tools and processes with which to do it, and we co-own that and are running a factory where there's further applications going through. So moving more into the payment space. And that kind of
so was it a modernization from changing the language of the code? Or was it modernization of the code sort of in place within the same technology?
Yeah,
because we've seen both. I mean, we've seen customers come along and go, we really want to get off this language. It's just dying. It's dead. We can't get the skills anymore. And we want to rewrite it in this application, in this more modern architecture. We can make it cloud native. We can save money and cost and use a whole pile of the cloud serverless or containerization tools, move it to a streaming architecture. And sometimes that's just such a big shift. And other times we love the technology. It's a good technology stack that it's on, but it's just out of date. All of the frameworks and the libraries are out of date, and no one really wants to sit there and update them all.
Yeah, both are things we're seeing. In the case of their agent teller app, it was more the re-architecture style. So it was a monolithic application in one of the common programming frameworks on one of the very common proprietary relational databases, and it's now a microservice-based architecture.
Right.
And that was important because being able to expose essentially APIs rather than just monolithic application with function calls, that meant that Bendigo is now able to integrate that across other systems more easily as well. So there's more value unlocked than just the clearing up of the risk of the prior app as well.
Yeah. And so they migrated from a relational type data structure to a document data structure using Mongo along the way.
Yeah, correct. And that for them, we were already in approved standard. They knew through their cloud journey that lifting and shifting from relational databases, things like an Oracle, SQL Server, that kind of thing, to a Postgres in the cloud, there's absolutely benefits that come from doing that. But that wasn't necessarily... relational database models aren't necessarily the best fit for microservice type architectures and modern development. And so they'd already made decisions around using MongoDB in a document-oriented data model for those types of applications.
Yeah. Okay. And so how would a customer get started? That's the thing that we often find. How do you get the door open? How do you get that first business case written? Often you've got to prove something works. It depends on which level of the organization you're talking to. Sometimes you've got to convince the technical people that it will work. Sometimes you've got to convince the C-level that these new tools and AI is the future and the way to go. And sometimes they're coming and banging our door down saying, we know we need to get onto this, but we don't know how to get started. What's your experience of the best way for customers to try things out and get moving? Yeah,
it's an interesting one because I think the first thing I'd call out is working with people that have done it. One of the great things about generative AI is it is everywhere and it's really quite straightforward to get started.
It's quite pervasive, isn't it? Yeah.
Correct. But because it's just a language interface a lot of the time, it's very broadly applicable, and therefore working out how to use that tool in a really specific way is hard, and therefore working with organizations that are operating in a space like yourselves and ourselves is really key, because you get a big head start on understanding the particular ways, particular prompts and ways of chaining things together. That means you're much more likely to have more success more quickly. So that's the first step. Yeah. From there, I think it's about tightly scoping around something to start on. All big enterprise organizations have these older systems. They have risks and challenges. Pick one off, find a partner that's done some of these things before, solve that problem, and then take those learnings into the next one. Because I think the other risk you face is you buy into some nirvana where you're actually just going to employ some Gen AI agent and give it access to your code bases, and things happen all over. That's not realistic.
It's a little bit risky, and it's risky from a will it work or not, and it's also risky from where is your code going? Are you giving away all of your IP to some anonymous company based offshore somewhere? So one of the things ClearPoint's been really good at is explaining how to do it safely, how to do it within your cloud tenant, how to keep your code even on-prem if you want to do it that way. I know for banks and some of the financial services, even some of the government organisations that we work with, they're very nervous about where is their data going. And so being able to do it safely, even on-prem, is key. And as you say, talking to people that have done it before. So we'll often come in and while we're talking about it, we can actually show a live demo. We've actually got some stuff that will run on laptops. We can show the code interface that we've worked with before and the types of use cases.
I think it's interesting. There's a point in there around the agnosticism that's so key, whether it's your cloud provider or your LLM or even the database technologies. While ChatGPT is 3 years old now since it burst onto the scene, we're still very early in the life cycle of how generative AI has evolved.
Yes,
even in January of this year with DeepSeek coming out and challenges. Every week it feels like there's something massive that changes.
Quite know what's around the corner,
Correct. And therefore making sure you're working in ways that don't lock you in. Yes, you might use this cloud provider today, but in the future you might want to use that one, or you might want to come back on-prem. So using technologies that work with all the cloud providers is important.
Yeah, I agree. And being able to show how that happens behind the scenes in the code level. Here's how easy it is to switch providers. Here's how easy it is to switch clouds if you need to. I think from our experience, once customers see it working and they go, this is some real code. Obviously, we're not showing some other client's code. It's code that we've either got ourselves or we're allowed to use. But if you've got technical people in the room, often showing the engineers, the lead engineers, how those tools can work. And they go, that'd be fantastic. If only we could talk to the original person who architected it and ask them why they did it this way, or what does this thing mean. Even that documentation you can generate. I've experimented with building diagrams from code,
Yep.
architecture diagrams. That's a huge benefit because no one wants to sit there and document something that they know is about to change.
Even things like test case generation and that kind of
True,
stuff.
yeah, that's another area as well, because often this legacy code and older apps haven't got a good regression test suite around them. That's often one of the first steps. How can we do this safely? And the safety is about, does it do the same things that it used to do? And having a robust test suite. You can use AI tools for the generation of that test suite quite effectively in our experience.
Yeah, completely. The other thing I think I've heard from customers as they go along this journey as well is there's a temptation to bring in more and more tools. And like in the database layer, because generative AI is richer in the way it can interpret and process different kinds of data, you end up needing to store things like vectors and do vector searches, things like just text and do natural language text matching, but also things like geospatial data and graph data alongside your more typical like operational and transactional data.
Yeah.
And the temptation there is, let's go pick the right tool for every single one of those things. And all of a sudden, my new application or the thing I'm improving is made up of 6 or 7 different technologies.
Yeah.
And you need your engineering team to somehow be experts in maintaining that and being...
The cognitive load can be overwhelming.
It's massive. So trying to work with some more platform-oriented capabilities that have, like for us, we have a much more unified interface. You connect to Mongo using the Mongo API. There's operators for things like geospatial, for vector search, for range-based queries, date-based queries, and all of that kind of stuff. And keeping those engineers in a single tool set that provides all of those capabilities lowers that cognitive load massively and gets them moving.
I was quite impressed that being able to store the vector embeddings in the same database and having those live updated when the data that it's embedded changes was pretty cool, because often that's a separate process, even a one shot, and you've got to run it through almost a batch to go and re-embed or re-vectorize that data. So having that live in the Mongo database was pretty cool and compelling. Yeah,
it's one of the interesting things that customers have found us a really great fit for those generative AI applications. There's the base flexibility of the data model, so the ability to add new fields. And that's something that's really common when you're working with a generative AI solution, because you're constantly wanting to add new features and give the model more information. Different vectors, maybe use different embeddings models and putting that in different fields. So that extensibility is key.
Yeah.
It almost just goes back to denormalization versus normalization of data.
Yeah.
But working with documents where they're self-describing, like JSON has fields and values. You also have embedding generally rather than referencing to different tables and doing joins. And like it gets into the weeds a bit, but the upshot of it is the types of data structures you're passing back to the LLMs are self-describing, context-rich documents that they're able to process really well as a human can.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're pulling back a row from over here and a row from over there and trying to join these things and then give it to an LLM, there's a lot more cognitive overhead either for the LLM to correlate across those things or for your engineer to patch that all together in code and hope the underlying data model doesn't change in a month.
Well, that's been great. I'm just conscious of time, so I just want to say thanks a lot, Jake. It's been an awesome conversation to learn about where Mongo's at, and hopefully we've informed our listeners and watchers of where ClearPoint's at. And the partnership that we have means that we can share the experiences, share our customer stories, share our ideas, and means that we're bringing together both ClearPoint's experience in the local market, Mongo's experience in the global market together. I think it's a really great partnership. I'm really excited for where this year is going to take us, both from a ClearPoint in Mongo, but also from where the industry is going to go and where AI is going to lead us.
Yeah, completely. And thank you for having me on. It's, like you say, really enjoying the partnership ourselves and looking forward to doing a lot more work this year.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake.
Cool.
It's been great.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.